Ever notice how the most powerful people almost never raise their voices? While everyone else is screaming, fighting, and losing their minds in heated arguments, there's a select group that wins every debate without direct confrontation. They don't attack. They don't get emotional. And yet, they always come out on top. How is that possible? There's a psychological technique used by elite negotiators, corporate leaders, and political strategists that turns any verbal confrontation into a silent victory. And here's the kicker: most people don't even realize they're being manipulated. But here's the problem: this tactic isn't taught anywhere. It's not in self-help books. It doesn't show up in public speaking courses. And maybe that's exactly why it works so damn well. So the question is, are you arguing to win or just to vent? The fatal flaw of modern arguments: most people believe winning an argument means proving the other person wrong. That's the first and biggest mistake. For centuries, debates were built on logic, rhetoric, and persuasion. Aristotle structured the foundations of classical argumentation: ethos, pathos, and logos. Socrates used questions to dismantle ideas, not to attack people. Sun Tzu taught that the greatest victory is the one achieved without battle. But today arguments have become emotional battlefields. Social media turned debate into digital gladiator combat. Everyone wants to dunk on someone, humiliate them, cancel them. The goal isn't to convince anymore, it's to destroy. And you know what happens? Nobody changes their mind. Nobody learns anything. Everyone walks away frustrated, ego bruised, convinced the other person is stupid, ignorant, or evil. A Stanford University study found that 87% of heated arguments end with zero perspective shift. Worse, they actually reinforce both sides' initial beliefs. You fight, you burn energy, you exhaust yourself, and the result is nothing. Now compare that to the great masters of negotiation. Warren Buffett rarely engages in public confrontations. Angela Merkel was known for her strategic patience. Henry Kissinger transformed diplomatic tensions into historic agreements, all without raising his voice. The difference? They understood something most people ignore. Arguments aren't won with better points. They're won with emotional control and strategic manipulation of perception. The psychology behind silent control. When someone enters an argument, the brain activates the amygdala, the region responsible for fight or flight responses. That's why you feel your heart race, your voice rise, the urge to interrupt. The problem is, when you're in that emotional state, you're not thinking, you're reacting, and whoever reacts loses. Now imagine this scenario: you're arguing with someone. The person raises their voice, gestures wildly, attacks your ideas, and you take a deep breath, keep your tone calm, pause before responding. What happens? The other person's brain short circuits. They expected an emotional reaction. They expected you to fight back, but you didn't. And now, they don't know how to proceed. That's the power of psychological disarmament. You're not ignoring the person. You're not avoiding the argument. You're simply refusing to enter their emotional game, and that gives you a brutal advantage. According to organizational psychologist Amy Cuddy from Harvard Business School, the perception of power in an interaction doesn't come from who yells loudest, but from who maintains control. And control isn't about dominating the conversation, it's about dominating yourself. Chris Voss, former FBI hostage negotiator, teaches that the person asking questions controls the conversation, not the one giving answers, not the one with the best arguments. Whoever asks, directs. Whoever directs, wins. And here's the secret: when you ask a question, you force the other person's brain to process, reflect, justify. You take them out of attack mode and put them in defense mode without them realizing it. If you want to stop losing arguments and start dominating any conversation, hit that like button right now. It helps the channel grow and motivates me to bring more content like this. The 3-pillar technique: how to apply it in real life. Now let's get to what matters. How do you apply this in the real world? There are 3 fundamental pillars that separate those who argue from those who dominate. First pillar: radical emotional control. This isn't about suppressing emotions. It's about not letting them control your actions. When someone attacks you, The natural impulse is to strike back. But striking back is exactly what the other person expects. It's what puts you on their level. The tactic? Strategic silence. You listen. You don't interrupt. You let the person talk until they're exhausted. And when they finish, you deliberately pause before responding. That pause has a devastating effect. It shows you're not rattled. It shows you're in control. Second pillar: reframing and mirroring. Instead of attacking the other person's argument, you reframe it. So, if I understand correctly, you believe that. This does three things: shows you were listening, creates an impression of empathy, and most importantly, gives you control over how the argument is framed. Chris Voss calls this labeling. You name the other person's emotion or belief before responding. It sounds like you're frustrated about this, or you feel this is unfair. Result: the person lowers their guard, and when the guard is down, you come in with your perspective without resistance. Third pillar: calibrated questions. Open-ended questions are psychological weapons. How did you reach that conclusion? What makes you believe that? What would be the ideal solution, your view? These questions aren't confrontational. They seem genuine, but they're forcing the other person to justify their own ideas. And often, in doing so, they spot the flaws themselves. You didn't have to prove anything. They dismantled their own argument. Companies like Amazon and Google train their executives in this technique. Strategic meetings aren't led by whoever talks most, but by whoever asks the best questions. Jeff Bezos is famous for starting meetings in silence, reading reports, and only then asking surgical questions that expose weaknesses in entire strategies. The dark side: when this tactic is used against you, here's what nobody talks about. This technique is extremely powerful, and it can be used to manipulate, deceive, and control. Politicians use this constantly. They don't answer questions directly. They reframe, deflect, ask counter questions. Lawyers destroy entire witnesses with nothing but well-calibrated questions. High-performance salespeople close million-dollar deals without ever pressuring the client, just guiding the conversation. And the worst part: you've probably been a victim of this and didn't even notice. Think about that time you left a meeting thinking you'd won the argument, but later realized you agreed to something you didn't want. Or that conversation where you were convinced of your point, but ended up doubting your own ideas. That wasn't an accident. That was psychological engineering. Law 13 of Robert Greene's 48 Laws of Power says, when asking for help, appeal to people's self-interest, never to their mercy or gratitude. This means you don't win arguments by appealing to reason or justice. You win by showing the other person that agreeing with you benefits them. And how do you do that? By controlling the narrative. Not fight, not attacking, but guiding the conversation. So the logical conclusion is exactly what you want them to believe. The future of arguments: AI, manipulation, and narrative control. Now imagine this. We're entering an era where artificial intelligence will participate in debates, negotiations, and even political campaigns. Companies like OpenAI, Google, and Meta are already developing systems that can identify emotional patterns in conversations and adjust responses in real time to maximize persuasion. Chatbots that never lose patience, never get emotional, never make emotional mistakes. How does a human being compete with that? The answer is simple: by adopting the same techniques. Emotional control, strategic reframing, and calibrated questions aren't just argument tactics. They're survival skills in the modern world. And here's the irony: the more people rely on algorithms to argue for them, the less they develop these skills. Result: an entire population vulnerable to mass manipulation, whether by politicians, corporations, or automated systems. ENSYS Rule 8 from Gibbs says, never assume anything. And that applies perfectly here. Never assume you're winning an argument just because the other person stopped talking. Never assume your argument is best just because it makes sense to you. And never, ever assume an argument is just about facts, because almost always, it's about emotions disguised as logic. The power of those who don't need to fight. So we come back to the initial question. Are you arguing to win or just to vent? Because if it's to vent, keep yelling, erupting, attacking. But if it's to win, to actually influence, persuade, and dominate conversations, you need to stop fighting. The most powerful people in the world don't fight. They control. They don't attack. They direct. They don't need to prove they're right, because they make others reach that conclusion on their own. And now, you know how. But here's the final question. Are most people ready to use this level of psychological control? Or would they rather keep losing arguments and blaming others for not understanding? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if this video made you think differently about how you argue, share it with someone who needs to see this. See you next time.